Now everyone should get the warning. Yeah. Do you
Thank
want to
you.
be on camera? Do you want to be recorded? Okay. Thank you, Andrew. I just want to let you know, Andrew, that you're breaking up every couple of words for me. I think it's your mic. All right. Now, which part of this rave was I up to? Essentially, the Henry reforms, as we know, didn't get up. And part of that, well, most of that is because there is a strong political opposition from a small but powerful group of very interested people. And they managed to convince the rest of the population that their interests were our interests, that our interests were aligned. And the ALP's retreat from their election policies around capital gains discounts and negative gearing reform is a recent example of this exact same dynamic. Tax is the hardest area of reform because it's the most vulnerable to scare campaigns and misinformation. Tax affects everybody, but we don't often know much about it, and it seems very technical. Economists and policymakers in the room will no doubt have questions about the policies that I'm about to suggest here, and I don't provide very much detail. But my challenge to you is to just treat this as a broad framework within which you are free to tinker. At present, in Australia, there are powerful interests coalescing around the need for tax reform, with the Business Council of Australia leading the charge. Their narrative is about balancing the budget, international competitiveness, prosperity, and growth. But it's also about facilitating decarbonisation, intergenerational equity, and increasing the know-how in our economy for long-term resilience. So there are aspects of this agenda that we can align ourselves with. Fundamentally, I think we should all agree that Australia's tax system in 2021 is not fit for purpose. It's not fit for the old economy, and it's certainly not fit for the new economy. But tax reform, I think, can be a massive part of the change that we need. So there are 120 different taxes in Australia, but 9 out of every $10 is raised by either personal income taxes, corporate income taxes, or the GST at the Commonwealth level. The workhorse is personal income tax. That is the wages and salaries of income from workers. The corporate tax rate makes it more expensive for capital-intensive industries to invest in Australia. Think high-tech manufacture. Meanwhile, we're dependent on mining and banking for corporate tax receipts, which raises issues of both environmental sustainability and overall economic resilience. At the same time as we're reliant on mining, we have squandered much of the value of, for example, the hydrocarbons and fossil fuels we've extracted. For example, in 2020, Australia overtook Qatar as the largest exporter of liquid natural gas in the world. Qatar takes in 20 times the tax revenue from its LNG exports than in Australia, compared to Australia. We have no price on carbon any longer, even though we need to decarbonise our economy rapidly. Housing and land ownership have become a vehicle for private wealth creation, supported by the inadequate taxation of land and the incentives in the income tax system to turn residential housing into piggy banks. So Prosper's position is that we all need to be participants in this conversation. We need a framework with which to understand it, understand the direction of change, and we cannot let the corporate elite dominate the conversation. So what is Prosper and why do we focus on tax and tax reform? Our vision is a just and equitable society created by ensuring that those who benefit from access to our land and the collectively owned resources, be they mineral resources, intellectual or technological inheritances, that people who benefit pay a fair price for that access. And we fundamentally hold that the earth is a birthright of all. Prosper is tasked with continuing the legacy of the American political economist Henry George. And Georges hold that the direction of social change, good or bad, is contingent on how we handle or mishandle the commons. The commons consists of the natural material of the universe that has been created, not been created by individuals. It also includes inherited cultural, intellectual, and technological wealth. So this is a little bit of a map of what is in the Georges Commons, or considered Georges Commons, in green there, and also in some of the non-tradable sectors over which we assign property rights. When we assign property rights and enclose natural resource commons, we may do so to address the issues of conflict over access, issues of degradation, overuse, and eventual collapse of those commons. And it may also be the case that exclusive possession of a part of the commons may be necessary to secure exclusive ownership over the products of labour. But it still brings into question how those equal rights to the commons should be distributed. The Georges tradition holds that distribution of these rights should be equal and that possession cannot cancel out those pre-existing rights in the commons. So where property rights over the commons result in economic rents, which are a very an economist term for like the income that is of the commons, the income of the commons, incomes of land, but also the income and return to monopoly. When somebody has a monopoly position in the market and where power is concentrated, we can think about these things, economic rents, as a form of income of the commons. When they are privatised, there's a denial of equal rights to the commons through either forced or contrived enclosure, and the result is inequality in wealth and power. And this can lead to adverse social change, a gross inequality. So Henry George stood for a commons which powered growth, but this was growth not based on extractivism, rather it was growth based on increasing know-how, unleashing animal spirits in the marketplace, but sharing the resulting increase in the value of the commons. The role of the state in all of this is to secure two sets of rights, both the collective rights to the commons and the returns to the commons, but also our individual right to the product of our labour. The existing structures of state power that limit, define, and enforce property rights, alongside the taxation system, is seen by Georges as the basic opportunity. So our focus is on the tax system and its incremental reform. And tax policy has massive implications for how different sectors of the economy fare. It has untapped potential to nudge the economy in the right direction through a series of incentives and disincentives for different economic activities. It's good to think of the tax system as like a steering wheel or a rudder for the economy as a whole. So the essential political economy argument that we're presenting within the tax shift framework is that goods and services, and especially the creation of jobs, should be relieved of tax, and those elements of our economy that generate rents, land, natural resources, and monopolies should be more regulated and more heavily taxed. As in this little infographic, labour and business taxes down, land and resource taxes up. The tax shift framework has the potential to bridge some familiar political economic divides between those calling for freer markets and those calling for more government regulation and spending. Progressives may argue that our overall tax pie needs to be bigger, and conservatives may argue that it needs to be smaller. The tax shift framework is compatible with both of these arguments because it's not about the size of the pie, it's about the mix of ingredients within the pie. The tax shift framework is revenue neutral. It's not concerned with the overall size of the government budget. Therefore, it should be inherently attractive to conservatives who argue for more efficient allocation of goods and services in the market by decreasing company payroll income tax. In this sense, this framework is pro-individual and it's pro-business. But it's also attractive to progressives for its redistributive properties and careful management of the natural world, for the foregrounding of the commons and the way that we share the commons as central task of the tax system. So in this sense, it's pro-commons and it's also pro-redistribution. But there are losers, and the losers are rentier industries, property, natural resource extraction, and these are the industries that thrive under our current system. The battle that we are trying to posit here is not between left and right politics. We need to move away from that frame, but between our community at large and rentierism, backed by the immense lobbying power of the mining, gas, oil, and property industries. So this is how we are framing this, as earned versus unearned value. As I outlined earlier in my rant about the commons and what Prosper's about, economic rent is the income of the commons. It's collectively created or comes by the privatisation of assets we all have an equal right to and an equal responsibility for. So earned value can be construed or conceptualized as goods, services, labor, and innovation, whereas unearned value can be construed as the returns to land, minerals, oil, gas, forestry, pollution, and networks, and also knowledge, intellectual property. Stagnant pools of unearned value are totally unproductive in the economy. We want to encourage economic activity that cycles more energy through, more money through the economy, not that which accrues wealth in stagnant pools of property rights that can be used to buy then even more power, a la Clive Palmer. If an investor, for example, chooses to buy shares in a company, their money is more likely to be used to create jobs, which will enable the delivery of services and allow employees of the company to spend wages in the community. But in contrast, if they choose to park money in land, hoping to cash in on the growth of the value of the commons, then that essentially is a loss of productivity to the economy as a whole. So the basic proposition, following from the Henry Review of Recommendations, is that we expand land taxes as a starting point. The growth of Australian land value in the last 9 months was $1.72 trillion. To put that in perspective, that was 86 years worth of banking profits, 3 times greater than the previous record. And almost all of that growth was in residential land. The value of land is basically a reflection of everything that happens around it: population growth, private and public investment, ecological services, and as we've seen this year, the monetary policy of distant places. The more profitable it is to grab some of the commonwealth through property investment, etc., the less investment is going to be directed into productive enterprise. And also a central point of this tax shift framework is around charging pollution, charging polluters. The true cost of releasing carbon can be brought into the market price of goods and services through a carbon tax or emission trading scheme. We know that this will nudge our economy away from fossil fuels, and the carbon taxation must be put back on the agenda in a new way. But there are potentially hundreds of other natural resources and pollutant taxes that can diversify our tax base, becoming powerful nudges for moving our economy in the right direction. Taxes change behaviour. At the first NENA conference, I heard Richard Dennis describe economic policy, and particularly tax policy, as a set of enormous, like inertia-laden levers. And he said, don't think too hard, just pull the right lever. Tax bads, do not tax goods. When the imposition of a tax results in fewer mutually beneficial exchanges or skews people's behaviour to avoid it, it can do more harm than good. So economists try to quantify and minimise these effects, and they call them deadweight costs. For example, payroll taxes that employers have to pay for every employee they have is likely to reduce the number of people employers are able to hire. And in the end, it comes out of our wages, which means we have less to spend elsewhere, or we have to work more. Taxes on incomes, payroll tax, business tax, make it harder to start businesses, create jobs, etc. They slow down the economy, they take earned income away from workers and businesses. And as a result, we're worse off than if the tax was taken from a source with lower deadweight costs, like land taxes, rent taxes, Pagovian taxes on pollution and other environmental road use charges, etc. Switching to taxing unproductive sectors in our economy rather than productive sectors returns to us in the form of lower unemployment, higher wages, and a more sustainable economy. Our current tax system, reliant as it is on personal income tax, is compounded by problems from taxing income support payments. Some of the greatest disincentives to work are imposed on young working families receiving family tax benefits while paying for childcare. Now, we have this debate in Australia at the moment around personal income tax, and the way that it's being framed is that personal income taxes fall on a really narrow band of high income earners. So like 50% of the personal income tax is paid by, 10% of the top income earners. And this is the way that the debate around personal income tax reduction and personal income tax cuts has been framed. We want to reframe it as fixing household income, because people on income support face massive effective marginal tax rates, far greater than any supposedly punitive tax rates imposed on people with higher incomes. However, it's worth remembering that when you start getting into the higher tax brackets, the burden of the income tax system means that you're going to spend as much money as is efficient to minimize or avoid that tax. So the more complicated the tax and transfer system, the greater the incentive and opportunity for individuals to minimize the amount of tax they pay. That's why we need to fix household income tax. Companies can make investments in innovation and productivity, and they can improve our standard of living. So why discourage productive economic activity through heavy corporate taxation settings? Companies should be taxed according to whether they're drawing rents or super profits, profit extracted from natural resources or monopolistic behavior, not from profits created by providing jobs and services and improvements to our living standards, or dare I say, innovation. But just to come back to this main point, more than anything else, land ownership has become a dividing factor in our society. We're increasingly split between people who have the opportunity to buy a house and people who don't. Many people don't like to think of Australia as having a class divide, but it's increasingly the case. The largest influencing factor on how prosperous you become should be the contribution you make, not how wealthy your parents are or how much of the value of the commons you're able to enclose. So that's my nifty little slideshow. This is what we've been working on. This is what Prosper's doing at the moment in relation to the new economy and the direction that we need to go on. I invite you to offer any thoughts or feedback, questions. I'd also love to know whether you can see this framework assisting you in your own work, whether you can link your objectives to more mainstream political discussions around economic policy and tax policy, whether or not there is an opportunity for you to reach across the political spectrum with the work that you have by adopting some of the narrative that I presented here today. So over to any questions. If not, we can all go to lunch. Although you guys are in Queensland, so is it lunchtime there?
We already had lunch. No, we all first post lunch. So thank you, Emily, for everything you've said. Yes. I've never seen such a bunch of slides with which I've so wholesomely agreed with so vigorously. It's absolutely fascinating. We have half an hour to the next session, but I guess we need to probably break up a good 10 minutes before. So we've got plenty of time for questions. Somebody called Matt asked an interesting question. So I wonder if you'd like to ask that in person, Matt, if you're there and can unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Okay, well, actually, I'm an ex-tax officer and have been involved in looking at the naughty behaviours of large corporates. But Fantastic. One of the interesting things is you haven't mentioned, I mean, that I can recall, what about the financial sector? There's an incredible, should we just say, abuse in the financial sector. And this goes back to some of the things that happened with the deregulation, under the political leadership of Thatcher and Reagan, the changes to the Glass-Steagall Act in the UK, in the US, yes. Where financial companies, banks, etc., are allowed to, well, it's foxes in charge of the hen house type situation. And we've had it absolutely incredible. But what I'm saying is what's happened is a whole lot of things. If you look at some of the work of I think a really articulate and very sarcastic, but very apt work by Satyajit Das on extreme money. It's just amazing. That's just the romp, both ignorance and stupidity in the financial market, but the people suffering so often are the general populace through abuse. Look at the banking sector inquiry. And they're still escaping. Look at all the reforms that tried to get up in the US, unfortunately. So we know there's vested interests. That's going to be a very big problem for us to change. And the other element is with the Georgia's process, which is the question I asked, which I haven't asked yet in the chat, I've had this discussion with someone else who's very keen on the Georgia sort of position. But if there's, say, undeveloped lands, or should we say rural land, owned large portions of this, some of this natural habitat, we're asking farmers now to take a more, shall we say, proactive, I'll use the term regenerative approach to their land management. But if they have to do it, is it envisaged that because they own the land, they should be paying a hefty. So one of the arguments given to me by someone who's pro this is saying, well, if it's unproductive, or it should be made productive. That's what does that say for the natural environment? This notion of the commons, okay, part of the commons is the natural environment, which Australia should cherish. We can make money out of it from tourism, but there's something more there than that. Anyway, that's another question. How does Georgism work around some of the huge rural properties, which are a treasure trove of natural environments?
Yeah, it's a really, really good and important question, because I think there is a strand, as you've picked up, of Georgia's thought, which is all about, well, the land is our, doesn't take into account the much broader kind of complex ecosystem services that are provided by so-called undeveloped land. My thinking is that there is a transfer system, potentially market, the growth of payment for services. Like I've got friends out here in the New England tablelands planting 2,000 trees a year on their farming properties, and the subsidies and grants that are available to them make that possible. I think that we can consider that within the transfer system. In terms of like whether or not rural land, like we know now, for example, that rural land is completely exempt from the land tax system at the state level. Primary production land is exempt. I think there's no reason why we wouldn't necessarily continue to have exempt rural land, or have thresholds that don't capture the lower value rural lands where there may be lots of conservation, but only capture the very high and broad acre kind of intensive agribusiness farming that happens. I think those kinds of design questions, I guess as a tax officer, I think perhaps that those are questions and issues that can be resolved in tax design. Whether or not we include certain things, whether or not we have offsetting. So for example, if your tax bill is X, but you planted or sequestered X amount of carbon, is there a tax offset? Yeah, I think that we can think those things through in the design aspect. And ultimately, there are much more knowledgeable and wise people than myself at NENA who work a lot on valuing the commons and valuing those broader ecosystem services. And certainly, if any of you are here, please contribute to this conversation, this point that Matt's made, which is a really important one.
If I could just indulge, yes is the answer to that question, certainly in common.
I've lost you.
It's Andrew.
Sorry.
It's Andrew. I'm not on mute. Can you hear me? Okay.
No, we can't hear you. Sorry.
Hear me now, though?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And Claire, we'll definitely get to your question as well. But in similar conversations, it was very much a change of the frame, not taking land out of production, but moving land into producing something else, i.e. ecosystem services or reef protection, those kinds of things. So I think that ties in with Claire in terms of a tax system is based on the things goods that are exchanged in markets, i.e. there's a price and we can exchange it or levy a tax on it. I think Claire's got a question related to how does that relate to things that aren't priced in the market? Claire, would you like to ask your question?
Thanks, Andrew. Can people hear me okay? It's my first time on Zoom talking today. Great, thanks. Yes, you mentioned, it's a really thought-provoking presentation, and I'm glad I was able to be part of it, Emily, thank you. You mentioned about, I think the last comment, and I might be not getting your words exactly right, but it was along the lines of your wealth shouldn't relate to how you've been able to kind of monopolise land or hang on to land, but rather the contribution that you make. And I wondered if the paper speaks to how that contribution is measured. Like Andrew said, if something doesn't, I just feel like automatically have a monetary value. Look, one of the things that I've seen from my work in the health sector is that our prioritisation of economic productivity is actually a major social determinant of health, and not in a good way. And I know, for example, that, and her name is escaping me right now, Jane, I'm going to find that and I'll put it in the chat, but there's an economist who has started to try and bring a gender lens to things like the measurement of value. And for example, my understanding of her work is that the reason that we don't account for caring responsibilities in economic accounts is that it would be so off the page with regard to the contribution that many women are making in caring responsibilities that it would throw the whole system out. So yeah, I'm just really interested, how do we measure that contribution or that productivity?
I wonder if it's Madeline Waring that you're thinking of, or Marilyn Waring. No, Kate Rayworth has a section on this kind of question of whether or not caring or what's sometimes referred to as reproduction or reproductivity is sort of counted and valued. And I don't know all of the answers to that, obviously, like there's so much great thinking. It was J.K. Gibson Graham and I think Catherine Gibson presented at the very first NENA conference, and they talk a lot about this idea of the economy as sort of being a layer cake with like natural ecosystem services, and then the caring or reproductive economy, and then the very, very thin layer on top is, you know, what we measure. I think the most useful thing that I can offer in relation to that, coming from a George's perspective, is that the value of all of those things in the end will grow the value of the commons. And one of the ways that we can measure that is through the measurement of land value. In the end, land sort of takes the gains. So yeah, I don't know if that's particularly helpful, and certainly doesn't answer your question in full. So I'm going to write a note here to think about how we incorporate measures or the contribution of the reproductive economy into this framework.
If I could just add something very small, I know too that Hilary Cottam, who people might know, she's not, I believe, an economist, she's a social worker, designer, social services designer. She has written an amazing book called Radical Help. And I know that when I heard her speak at a conference earlier this year, she's turning her attention. So it's not just reproductive as such, but the caring economy, you know, so like how do we care for our older people as we become frail? How do we care for, you know, like I just see social capital in the community, again, is known to be a positive determinant of health. More social capital, less physical and mental health well-being risk. Doesn't mean it's eradicated. And also the impact of early childhood living on adults and young people with mental health conditions. So I think it's if you like, it's not just about the production of a unit, but it's about the I don't know, you can see I'm struggling with words, but it's about the holding and the tending to, the nurturing.
Yeah, and I think this is a really important point, because a lot of the dialogue around how we fix household income, it really is about making policy enable women to go work for money, about formalizing caring or I've used the term reproductive economy, which is a kind of economistic term that means everything that's required to reproduce labor.
Right.
So that incorporates like caring and all the things that you mentioned. And when we talk about, we need to ensure that the tax system doesn't penalize people for choosing to work an extra day if they've also got young children, I think that's really important, but it does need to be balanced against, well, are we forcing people into the workforce? And then, kicking the can of caring responsibilities either to the private sector or to, some other labor, like less expensive source of labor. So there's a class dimension to that as well. Thank you so much for that feedback, Claire. I'm going to, we'll think about that in relation to what we're presenting here. There's more questions.
We've got more comments rather than questions. One thing, I'm about to give a talk on how we value ecosystem services, good nature of goods and services. And I'm very aware of the criticism that may be leveled at me when I give my talk, in the sense that when we do attach values to these things, when we do find proxy values for things like care or nature, whilst that activity in and of itself doesn't mean that we're suddenly putting nature on the balance sheet and carving it up and selling it, it is a criticism that I find leveled my way. So I wonder, Emily and Claire, if you could reflect on, if we were to start quantifying care, is that a particular risk that we might face from nefarious forces? It's a question.
Yeah, because it's really a question of whether we're bringing in tangibles or are we commodifying them by measuring them in a way that allows us to label them productive or unproductive or, whatever. But I think ideally, like we have a system where what we measure gets managed, right? I mean, that was like statistics 101. Can you measure it? Do you measure it? Good, you're paying attention to it. And when you don't measure something, you don't pay attention to it. Implicitly, the value is not there. But then at the same time, we risk commodifying. I don't know the answer. Does anyone else have anything super insightful to say about that?
It's clear again, I don't have anything super insightful, but I have to say this conversation and just this week I was starting to look at social capital. I wonder how that is measured. I don't know, I have no idea. I just know the term. But for me, it's a fundamental part of a new economy model, which is that how do we start to change the measurement system in a way that serves the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, rather than using the old paradigms, measures and systems in order to try and, because it just doesn't, I think it feels to me like it's in a different book. It's not on a different page, it's in a different book. But yeah, this is really thought-provoking. Thank you.
I think
so. My thoughts are that with all of this, it's privatizing the functions of nature, and I think we need to reimagine the commons and regard nature as part of the commons that has a really important social role, rather than privatizing and commodifying nature.
Michelle, I don't know what talk you're going to next, but that's a great question if you come to my presentation at 2 o'clock. I just want to kind of keep discussion a little bit on the core of where Emily started with our current tax policy, rather than move into, I guess, go too far down that rabbit hole of whether we're commodifying care or commodifying nature. Does anyone have any, and Michelle, please ask that question of me later. Does anyone have any sort of comments or questions for Emily regards the shape of our tax system or the intent of our tax system?
Look, I just wanted to mention one of the wonderful things that was done by the Labor government was something called the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, which did an enormous amount of fantastic work. Why I'm mentioning this is because when this silly question, which I won't go into, comes up, but how can we pay for all these good things that we want to do? One of the things tax can do is to encourage valuable, useful things. And we can do this in so-called, giving tax breaks, etc. But we can give direct support. And the Clean Energy Finance Company gave very low-cost loans. They got them back. They earned a very small amount of interest. But this is the area where, in the actual case of clean energy, various products such as renewables, ARENA also, of course, stepped in. But we can do this with all sorts of other industries, which we desperately need in the rural sector to develop regenerative farming in regards to much more positive and useful ways to bring quality produce, based on around, say, various organic gardening, and lots of information now coming through that this is good for carbon sequestration, etc., etc. But this is an element which does not have to be plagued by the claim, oh no, but we can't pay for it. Well, I won't stray into MMT, but that's another element.
Tomorrow or Sunday, I think.
Yes.
There's going to be so many discussions around that kind of thing. I love NENA for that. I've taken a note of what you just said, Matt. And I also wanted to respond just quickly to what Michelle said about, we should be protecting the commons and keeping them in commons governance and not privatizing them. Couldn't agree more. The question is, like, what's the scale then of governance? And when it comes to existing commons that are privatized or marketized, how do we then deal with the rents? So I don't have all the answers to that, but I certainly think that at the moment, what we have is a situation where commons that have been privatized, overwhelmingly the incomes that are flowing from those commons are being privatized and creating inequality and other problems.
Is there a mechanism that you would be seeking feedback, or is there a way you would like it? What would you like us to do from here to assist you?
If there's anything in this that has really resonated with you, or I found this very helpful, this feedback session and just the general questions. I'd love to get a copy of the chat.
Yep.
So I can have a look through. And then, yeah, in terms of more structured feedback, this is one of the difficulties of not having NENA face-to-face this year. So you can't come up to me at the coffee and tell me what you really think. Certainly, if there was anything in there that you would like to address, please give me an email for sure. It's emily.sims@prosper.org.au.
Okay. And before, thanks, Emily. There is a question from, is it Jairi? Am I pronounced that correctly? Jairi Lewis?
It's Jaya Lewis, but
Jaya Lewis, thank you.
Not known.
Hi, Jaya. You want me to talk about MMT in relation to
Look, I know that's it's a big
So-
kettle of fish. I'm just curious. I'm always interested to hear people how they talk about how taxation works as a form of income for the government. So
Yes.
especially like, I understand the idea of taxation being like a lever to stop basically we'll call undesired actions. But I'm always a bit confused when we try to talk about it as a way of earning cash in Australia, considering the ideas of modern monetary theory. So does that make sense?
Yep, totally. And my colleague Jessie Hermans is really across the MMT aspects and the relationship with the tax system. So I think my understanding is that we need to think about our taxation system as essentially a way to destroy money.
Yeah.
in which case the steering wheel analogy is even more powerful. So we've seen this year that all of the quantitative easing, the wall of capital that has been loosed upon the world has fallen to the housing market.
Yeah.
And
I
it's
was
really
shocked. I was shocked by that figure, by the way. We said 1.8 trillion in a year in Australia.
9 months.
That's insane.
It is quite insane. Yeah, it's quite insane. But what's even more insane is that like we weren't the biggest. Like Australia's land market wasn't the biggest increase in 9 months. So yeah, I think it doesn't, in the context of a narrative in which the tax system is conceived in terms of adequacy, and like our revenue effort has to match our spending, and the balance must be, budget must be balanced, and there needs to be fiscal restraint in the non-MMT world, right? I think this framework works in terms of thinking about adequacy. Like I can talk to somebody who cares a lot about taxation adequacy and revenue effort and talk about fiscal constraint. The points made around tax mix, they still stand, but I actually think they're even more powerful when you consider MMT, because if you're looking at the way that quantitative easing has hit the commons in terms of raising and inflating the price of land and fixed assets, then destroying that extra money in the economy through effective taxation of those particular assets is really, really fundamentally important. Does that get at your question? Or
Yeah, it does. And look, it's basically you've answered it. So in terms of, we're just talking about taxation as a way to remove large amounts of undesirable money in certain areas. Cool.
yeah, and the question is from where?
Yeah.
From where? I mean, at the end of the day, all taxes come out of either rent or labor.
Mm.
I really like the idea of getting rid of, or like the idea of removing the left and right wing side of it. Because I have friends, economic friends, who are, let's just say they've read a little bit too much Milton once upon a time.
Read too much Bill Mitchell, did you say?
Milton Friedman.
Milton Friedman. You can never read too much Milton.
But basically, the idea of payroll tax, because I know lots of small business and other people who get pretty much screwed by this, basically all these kind of levers into entering business as a small party compared to a bigger party. It'd be amazing to see income tax, payroll tax scrapped.
If you are really keen on understanding the incidence and deadweight costs of payroll tax, I highly recommend a very, very long paper by Jason Nasios and his colleagues at Victoria University. I'll try and get a link for you.
Can you spell his name, please?
Pardon?
Jason
Nasios. He is an economist at VU. And they modeled payroll tax, the impact of payroll taxes. The issue with payroll tax in Australia is sort of not just, it's not as simple as I've presented. It's partly because of the way that payroll taxes interact across the Federation. So the rates of payroll tax, the exemptions of payroll tax in different jurisdictions, etc.
In Australia and New Zealand.
Oh.
So for example, in the Northern Territory, almost all of the payroll tax is collected from companies who are not based in the Northern Territory. So for them, it's like importing capital, you know. So it's got a different economic impact to say payroll taxes in Victoria or New South Wales, but it's all very complicated. And I think the basic framework of like, is it a productive activity? Yes. Don't tax it so much. Is it an unproductive activity or a part of our commons? Tax it. The simplicity of that, I think, is really quite powerful, even though, as someone pointed out in the comments, you know, sometimes payroll tax can be quite a good tax in certain circumstances.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you mostly to Emily. Wonderful presentation. Emily's email address is in the chat, and I would think after the conference, certainly all of the chat and certainly The presentations will be all presented again online through the NENA website. Thank you to the questioners, and let's give ourselves 5 minutes before the next session.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming along to hear about tax reform. I didn't think anyone would come, frankly.
It's great, Emily. It's one of my favorite subjects.
It's mine too, but you know, like, it's not everybody's cup of tea. I think that, you know, like, just to say goodbye on this note, I think that our safety and future, you know, we've got to make dramatic changes to the way that we tax things. Yeah, among the many things that we have to address.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Michelle.
you. Just before you go, Emily, if you could, I mean, there'll be, I think, like a stop recording button will need to be pressed, and well, I assume it'll do when you end the meeting, I suppose.